He heard it before he saw anything. He's a vegetable now, doesn't even blink. Look, just forge the signature and send me the paperwork. The voice was sharp, confident, familiar. It was his brother. Thomas lay completely still, the rough fabric of the hospital sheet itching his cheek. His muscles refused to move, not because he couldn't, but because he had to stay silent. Pretend. Keep listening. Outside the glass door of his private hospital room, Marcus leaned against the wall in a crisp blazer, phone to his ear, completely unaware that the man he was talking about was wide awake, absorbing every word like acid on skin. He won't need the house anymore. Trust me, he's gone. I'll take care of everything. The call ended. A soft chuckle. Then silence. Thomas's heart pounded against his ribs, but his face, trained by weeks of forced stillness, showed nothing. No flicker, no twitch. Just the same coma patient mask everyone had come to expect. This was the 4th day he'd been awake. He remembered opening his eyes in the dark one night, seeing only the blinking light of a monitor. No one had noticed, and he hadn't made a sound. He was still processing it all. The accident, the pain, the coma, and now, this. His own brother, selling the house they grew up in, the house Thomas rebuilt with his own hands after their mother passed, all while declaring him brain dead to a realtor. The betrayal was suffocating, but something in him, something deep and buried, told him to wait, to observe. Elizabeth, his wife, had visited hours earlier. Her voice had cracked as she read him poetry, thinking he couldn't hear. She whispered, "Please, come back to me." She didn't know he already had, and yet he didn't speak. Not yet, because he needed to see. He needed to know who was standing by him, and who was dancing on his grave, while his heart was still beating. Marcus returned the next day with a briefcase and a self-satisfied smirk. He waved a set of documents at the nurse, who barely glanced at them. Just making sure things are handled properly. He would have wanted this. Thomas could feel the fury rising in his chest, but he let it settle. Let it burn slow and deep. In that moment, a part of him cracked. Not physically, but morally. Why be good? Why be the quiet, helpful one? This is what it gets you, alone in a bed while someone sells your life out from under you. But then he remembered something else. A boy named Eli, the broken wheelchair. The stormy night. He'd driven across the state once just to hand-deliver a specialized chair for that boy. No cameras, no praise, just a promise fulfilled. Maybe the world didn't see him, but the right people did. That memory kept him grounded. He wasn't done yet, and Marcus, he had no idea the man he thought was gone was about to rise. He never needed applause. In a world addicted to noise and recognition, Thomas Caldwell built his legacy in whispers, through quiet gestures, long nights, and hands that never shook, even in moments of uncertainty. To the outside world, he looked like any other middle-aged man with tired eyes and a modest wardrobe, button-up shirts, worn brown shoes, and an old leather satchel he refused to replace. But behind that simplicity was a mind that had rebuilt lives. Years before the accident, Thomas founded the Caldwell Recovery Initiative, not because he wanted to make a name for himself, but because he couldn't unsee the faces of families torn apart by sudden brain injuries, strokes, or trauma. He'd been a therapist in underfunded hospitals, watching patients discharged too early because insurance ran out. So he built something better. He started in a rented office with peeling paint, using second-hand equipment, treating patients others had given up on. His method was different, more human, more personal. He believed healing didn't come from machines, but from connection. One of his earliest patients was Eli Monroe, a 12-year-old boy who had fallen from a second-story window, leaving him nearly immobile. Doctors told the family he'd never walk again. The mother, a woman named Teresa, came to Thomas out of desperation. They didn't have the money. He didn't ask for it. For 6 months, Thomas drove 2 hours every Saturday to Eli's home, teaching him how to grip a spoon again, how to balance, how to take steps in silence. One day Eli stood on his own. Teresa fell to her knees and sobbed. Thomas simply smiled, packed his things, and said, "He's got this now." That story never made headlines, but it lived in the hearts of everyone who'd seen what Thomas could. And now, that man lay in a bed, betrayed by his own brother, listening to his legacy being sold like an old couch. Even in silence, though, he watched. One afternoon, a young nurse named Jasmine stepped into the room. She was new, nervous. She gently adjusted his blanket, speaking to him like he could hear, unlike the others. "I read about you," she whispered once. "What you did for Eli and for Mr. Vargas. My cousin. You probably don't remember. He didn't react. Couldn't. But inside something flickered. Others might have forgotten, but not everyone. Outside the hospital, Marcus flaunted his new lifestyle, flashy watches, lavish dinners. When Elizabeth wasn't around, he treated the A staff like obstacles. His charm was practiced, his intentions rotten. He told everyone that Thomas had no chance. His brain's mush. The doctor said so. No one questioned him. Why would they? Thomas, though, began to see cracks in that illusion. The way Jasmine lingered near the door. The way one of the janitors, an old man named Carlos who used to deliver groceries to Thomas's clinic, nodded respectfully every time he passed. These weren't grand acts, but they were real. Slowly, quietly, something began to shift. It began with a single note, folded carefully, left on the nightstand by Jasmine after her shift. She didn't say a word, just placed it there, beneath his water cup. Thomas waited until the room was empty, then turned, his head slowly, painfully, and read it with trembling fingers. "I believe you're still in there. If you can blink twice, I'll be here tomorrow." He did. The next day she came back. No questions, no panic, just her hand resting gently on his, and a soft, "I knew it." That moment didn't change the world, but it changed his. From then on, Jasmine became his secret ally. She didn't tell Elizabeth, not yet. She said Thomas needed control first, dignity, a choice in how to come back. Together they began subtle movements, eye exercises, finger twitches, muscle reactivation, all hidden behind the mask of a coma. Jasmine covered for him, adjusted charts, timed visits so Marcus never suspected a thing. Meanwhile, Marcus grew more confident. He had transferred most of the house funds into a shell account. The property had been listed under a fake trust. He bragged about it during calls with shady investors. "He's as good as dead," he repeated. "Might as well cash in." But cracks were spreading. A woman named Linda Mayfield, head of the board at Thomas's foundation, tried to contact him directly. Emails went unanswered. Her calls were intercepted by Marcus, who claimed Thomas had left everything in his hands. That didn't sit well with her. Linda had known Thomas for over a decade. She remembered the day he refused a massive grant because it came with a clause. That would limit free patient access. People over politics, he'd told her. Now someone pretending to be him was greenlighting luxury renovations at the foundation's rehab center and quietly cutting programs. It didn't match. She began to dig. Back in the hospital, Thomas and Jasmine had a system. A squeeze of the hand meant yes. 2 blinks meant danger. A faint smile, when it finally returned, meant hope. And in that space of near silence, Thomas began to reclaim himself. One morning, Carlos, the janitor, entered with a tray of fresh towels. He paused, looked at Thomas. "You saved my brother's legs," he said quietly. "He was in a motorcycle crash they wanted to amputate. You told them to wait. You were right." Thomas moved his finger just slightly. Carlos blinked. "You're awake, aren't you?" No one shouted. No big reveal. Just a nod of understanding. The world had written Thomas off, discarded him as just another broken man. But piece by piece, gesture by gesture, those who truly knew him began to feel the truth, and outside a storm was brewing. Linda's investigation was unearthing the forged documents. Jasmine was recording her sessions discreetly, building evidence, and Thomas, he was no longer just surviving. He was preparing. It was the anniversary of the Foundation's first major success, 10 years since Eli Monroe had walked unaided across the stage of his school auditorium. Elizabeth organized a small, commemorative event in the rehab center's main hall. Despite her exhaustion, she still smiled for the patients, still tried to keep the light on, even while mourning her husband in silence. Marcus was there too, grinning like a celebrity. He stood at the podium, suit sharp, voice syrupy. "Thomas would be proud," he said, "that his legacy lives on, through all of us." Jasmine, standing by the side of the stage, nearly gagged. In the crowd, a camera blinked red. A hidden one, placed by Linda 2 days earlier after growing suspicions. She'd uncovered enough to know Marcus was lying. But she wanted more. She didn't know she was about to get it, because halfway through Marcus's speech the crowd stirred. The back doors opened. A few people turned. A figure entered, tall, pale, leaning slightly on a cane. Elizabeth's breath caught in her throat. Jasmine froze. Linda stood up so quickly her chair toppled. Thomas Caldwell walked down the aisle in complete silence. No music, no spotlight, just the sound of a man who shouldn't be walking straight toward the front. For a moment Marcus didn't see him. Then he did. And something, in his face, something slippery and smug, cracked. Thomas reached the podium, didn't look at his brother, didn't touch the mic. He turned to the audience and spoke. "I never thought I'd have to fight for my own name," he said. "But here we are." Gasps. A nurse screamed. Someone dropped their glass. Elizabeth covered her mouth, crying silently. Thomas continued. "For weeks I listened, paralyzed, watching my life dismantled by someone I once called family. I waited, I healed, and I watched." He turned finally to Marcus. "You said I was gone, but I never left," Marcus stammered. This isn't real." "Security footage disagrees," Linda interrupted, stepping forward, holding a USB drive in her hand. The silence was volcanic. Thomas didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He handed the microphone to Linda, then stepped aside. Jasmine helped him to a seat. His hand trembled, and from fatigue, not fear. Linda played the footage, snippets of phone calls, the forged documents, the laughter, the lie. Every face in the room shifted. Respect, horror, disgust. Thomas looked down at his hands, the same ones that had rebuilt a boy's legs, held broken skulls gently, wiped. Tears from parents' eyes now balled into trembling fists in his lap. He relaxed them. He had come not for revenge, but for truth, and this was just the beginning. The footage didn't lie. The room was frozen in disbelief. No one moved. No one dared speak. As the final clip played, Marcus chuckling over speakerphone, calling his comatose brother dead weight, the truth landed with full weight. When the screen went black, Linda stepped back and looked at Thomas. "Would you like to press charges now?" she asked gently, her voice filled with restrained fury. But Thomas, sitting quietly, shook his head. Not yet. Instead, he looked at Marcus, not with hate, but with a strange, sorrowful recognition, like he was staring at the ruins of someone he once loved. Marcus opened his mouth, scrambling for defense. "I was protecting the family. The house needed to be sold. You were gone, man. Everyone thought you didn't protect anything." Elizabeth cut in. Her voice was ice. "You stole, you lied. You buried him while he was still breathing." The crowd began to murmur, board members whispering to each other, former patients shaking their heads. One stood, Eli Monroe, now 19, taller, stronger, eyes hard. "He saved my life, and you tried to erase him." That was the first applause. Then, another voice, Teresa, Eli's mother, "He never asked us for a penny. He just helped. Who are you to touch what he built?" Marcus backed away slowly, face pale, but the walls were closing in. A city reporter in the audience began writing feverishly. Cameras from the local news station, invited to cover the celebration, turned toward Marcus. Thomas stood again, wobbled slightly, but stood tall. "There will be consequences," he said quietly. "Legal, personal. But I won't destroy you. That's not who I am, and you know that." Marcus couldn't respond, because deep down he did know. That was the real difference between them. One built with quiet devotion, the other took loudly, recklessly, until there was nothing left to take. Security escorted Marcus out. No violence, no shouting, just a quiet public undoing. Later that night, Thomas sat outside the foundation building with Jasmine and Elizabeth. The air was crisp. Jasmine handed him tea. He took a long sip. "Do you think people will believe I'm back?" he asked. Elizabeth leaned her head on his shoulder. They never stopped. He looked out at the night sky. He was still tired, still healing, but his voice had returned, and the world was listening. The courtroom was quiet, not the kind of quiet that comes from order, but from disbelief. The case had moved quickly. The footage, the forged documents, the false power of attorney, it was all irrefutable. Marcus stood beside his attorney, sweating under the weight of a truth that had finally caught up. Thomas sat behind the prosecution, not as a vengeful plaintiff, but as a witness. He wore the same shirt he used to wear to his patient visits. Simple, slightly faded, blue, no tie, no bravado. The judge read the charges aloud. Embezzlement, fraud, identity theft. Marcus avoided his brother's eyes. For the first time in months, he had nothing to say. Outside the courtroom, people gathered. Reporters, former patients, volunteers of the foundation, even random strangers who had read the story online. Thomas's quiet return had become a symbol of something bigger. The right to be seen for what you do, not what you wear or what others think you've become. But Thomas didn't care about symbols. He just wanted his foundation back, and his peace. After the hearing, Elizabeth asked if he wanted to give a statement to the press. He shook his head. No need. The truth is already out there. Still, as he walked to the car, a young man approached him. It was the real estate agent who had facilitated the fraudulent sale of the Caldwell house. He looked ashamed, hands shaking. Slightly. I didn't know, I swear. Marcus said you'd given up power of attorney, that the sale was necessary. Thomas looked at him for a long moment, then said, People lie, but it's your job to verify the truth. The man nodded. Then, unexpectedly, added, I donated my commission to the rehab wing for Eli. I'm sorry. Thomas just nodded. He didn't say, I forgive you. He didn't need to. Some things don't require words. Meanwhile, Linda had reinstated Thomas as full executive director of the foundation. Jasmine received a full-time role overseeing patient engagement, a title Thomas insisted on creating himself. People like her, he said, they're the reason patients come back. Not just to walk, but to feel human again. That week, the center hosted its annual community day. Patients old and new arrived with family. Balloons, music, shared stories. And in the middle of it all, Thomas stood holding a cup of lukewarm lemonade, quietly observing. He wasn't the loudest voice in the room, but he was the reason the room existed. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived at the Caldwell home. Handwritten. The envelope was creased, almost nervous in its appearance. It was from Marcus. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't try to excuse himself. He simply wrote, I don't know who I became. Maybe I never was someone worth trusting. But you stayed you, even when you had every reason not to. Thomas read it once, then again, then folded it gently, and placed it inside an old journal, the one he used to jot notes about patient progress, memories from field visits, and half-finished ideas for new therapies. That journal had dust on it for months. Now it was open again. He wasn't sure if he would ever speak to Marcus again, but he did know one thing. He hadn't lost himself. In the days that followed, something curious began to happen. Former patients began to share their stories online. Parents wrote about how Thomas had changed their children's lives. Videos surfaced, old clips of him patiently guiding patients through painful steps, clapping when they reached a goal, sometimes even crying with them. A local news segment titled him, The Man Who Listened While They Thought He Slept. He didn't watch it, but Elizabeth did, and she cried. One evening, Thomas sat on the porch with Carlos, the janitor from the hospital. They shared coffee in silence, watching the sun dip behind the trees. You ever think about giving up? Carlos asked. Thomas smiled faintly. Not until I had to pretend I already had. They both chuckled, a quiet, tired sound that said more than words ever could. The foundation expanded. A new wing was added and named after Thomas's late father, a man who, though absent in life, became a symbol of strength for both brothers. Marcus had grown angry at that absence. Thomas had built from it. Eli came back to volunteer on weekends. Jasmine created a support group for caregivers. Linda proposed a national partnership, and Thomas, he simply kept showing up. He didn't seek revenge. He chose restoration. He didn't rebuild his image. He just kept doing the work. And the world, at last, opened its eyes. There are wounds that never bleed. They whisper, fester, hide beneath the surface. Thomas Caldwell's silence wasn't weakness. It was watchfulness. A man who chose not to speak until his voice could be heard in full. This story wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about reclaiming wealth or punishing betrayal. It was about a question each of us eventually faces. Who are we when no one is watching? Thomas had every right to grow bitter, to strike back, to let the betrayal harden him. Instead, he did something far more difficult. He stayed who he was, and in doing so he revealed something most people miss. That true strength is quiet. It's in the man who still helps others, even after being forgotten. In the woman who fights for dignity when no one is clapping. In the nurse who sees what others ignore. In the brother who doesn't collapse under the weight of loss, but rises, scarred and still kind. It's easy to celebrate someone when they stand at a podium, giving speeches, collecting applause. It's harder to notice the person sweeping the floor of the rehab center long after the lights go out. But that person might be the reason a child walks again. So if this story left anything behind, let it be this. Don't wait for someone's obituary to understand their value. Don't assume quiet means small or simple means insignificant, or stillness means absence. Look deeper. Ask more. Be present. Because sometimes the strongest people in the room are the ones no one is watching. Before you go, there's one more story I need you to hear. It's just as unforgettable.